All right. So gang, what we'll do is this. We've broken this up into two power or two Wednesdays because I want to get through. I've always wanted to team up with Norm and talk about my trip because he's got some insights on stuff that even though I did all my homework, I don't know. And then toward the end, we're going to stop. And then those that want to ask questions, especially the folks that are doing the 2023, I've got a good feeling a lot of what Norm and I are going to cover here early on will help answer a lot of the folks' stuff. So we're going to jump into this and have some fun. So I hate camping. I really hate camping. I'm a whitewater paddler by nature. I like to finish the day with a mattress and a hot shower, but that doesn't happen on these trips, and you'll see why. And this is a picture where we started. This is the headwaters. This is up at where the Gallatin, Jefferson, and Madison rivers come together, looking south or north, I guess I should say. Let's do it this way. I'm looking downstream. Okay, what's the next cell? Oh, you want me to do that, Mac? Okay, there we go. So here's the agenda. We're gonna do a little background, trip plan, gear, gonna walk you down the river. Along the way, I'm gonna talk about weird stuff and have some final thoughts and thank yous. We'll get about halfway through this today, and then next Wednesday we'll finish it off. My background, been paddling for 46 years. I've had the privilege of paddling everywhere across the planet: Australia, Costa Rica, Europe. I'm an ACA level 4 whitewater kayak instructor, currently the president of the Iowa Whitewater Coalition, and then I'm a coach for the Iowa State Canoe and Kayak Club. Early on, I was a flatwater racer. You can see at the top picture, I ran on the USCA circuit for a number of years. I do dragon boats. I've been dragon boating. That's that bottom center picture. Put 20 people in a war canoe and just go nuts. It's a blast. But yeah, mostly I've been doing a lot of whitewater the last few years. But the one thing missing from my resume was a big, long overnight paddle. And I've always wanted to do the whole river. Originally, I was thinking about doing the Mississippi. And then I said, the Missouri's got a lot more neat things to it. And I'm very glad. And we'll talk about why. But yeah, there were, it's go big or go home. And there were times when go home would have been probably a good option. So here it is. I started at Three Forks, Montana on June 4th. You start any earlier than that, you really got to worry about some weather. And I had crappy weather the first 3 weeks, but after that, it turned out pretty well. I finished October 5th down at Burns Point in the Gulf of Mexico. I paddled solo. I know that freaks a lot of people out there. What about, you're going to be alone out there? Well, I had my GPS. I wasn't alone in any way, shape, or form. And with all the river angels, you're really not alone. The other trick is if you're paddling with somebody, you better really like them, because I had some horrid arguments with myself and I eventually won. But yeah, there are days if you're high and your partner's low, those don't go well together. So I would recommend, paddling solo is not an issue. I think it adds to the journey, adds to what you're trying to do. I had no planned daily schedule. It took about 2 weeks to get out of my head that I had to do so many miles a day, had to be at certain places. Norm does a neat job of going through and post-trip interviews where what was the one question Norm will ask is, what was the biggest regret on your trip that you had? And literally to a person, they always had said, if you go out on the webpage and read all those blogs, I planned a schedule. Tuesday I'm going to be here, Wednesday I'm going to be here, Thursday I'm going to be here. These trips don't work like that. You get windbound, things come up, you may see something you want to stay an extra day. And so really, unless you really have to be someplace by a certain time, I would go without a schedule and just let the trip kind of organically happen. And in 2022, there was about 10 of us, and I was the only one of the crew that went all the way down to the Gulf. So I was it for the year. I'm a retired engineer. I love statistics. And so at the end, I took my data and put it into a spreadsheet and gave it to my buddy Ross Wilcox, and he ran the numbers. I had 3,743 miles on the GPS. It's about 700 hours of paddling. That's 2 million strokes. Dave Forbes has said, hey, go calculate the number of strokes you take. It'll blow you away. It does. No idea I'd ever take that many strokes. Roughly spent 8 hours a day paddling, whether I was on the Missouri or the Mississippi. A little faster on the Mississippi, about 5.5 versus 4.5. Some of that as I stopped a little bit more on the Missouri, and we'll talk about that during the PowerPoint. And average miles, I was doing about 23 to 25 a day. On the Mississippi, about 35. And I, both times I did about a 60-mile day on each of the rivers. I'd like to tell you that because I was feeling good and things were great and I was all pumped up. The real reason I did 60 miles in one day is I couldn't find a camping spot, so I had just to keep going till I found one. Gear. This is the part of how much do you like to eat? So if you like to eat and you like to carry lots of water and you don't mind, long involved portages, I'd take a canoe. But if you like to go fast and you're willing to minimize your gear, kayaks are wonderful. At a 17-foot Gulfstream, weighs about 40 pounds. It's a Kevlar fiberglass layup, big hatch areas front and back. It's the blue boat you see there hanging below my racer. I only took one paddle. I'm a big believer in Werner paddles. I caught a little bit of crap for that. Why didn't you have a backup paddle? In 46 years, I've only broken one Werner paddle. And that's when I put it between two rocks and kept going downstream. And I also, on this trip, my paddle was my paddle. I didn't use it for a shovel, didn't use it as a tent stake. It had one purpose and it worked just fine. The only time I'm going to soapbox is your life jacket. I wore an Astral YKT. It's my racing life jacket, whitewater jacket. The last part of the trip, I got really hot. I probably should have switched over to maybe a buoyancy jacket. But as you'll see, there are parts, especially in the upper part of this trip, you're out in the middle of 5 to 6 miles of open water. And if you go over, even if with my GPS and hitting SOS, I'm going to be in the water and that water is going to be ripe for cold water shock and hypothermia, you wear your jacket. And it's a safety factor. And I always laugh when someone says, well, my jacket's not comfortable. And I said, well, then you're wearing the wrong jacket. Because I wore mine for 124 straight days. And if I can do it, anyone can do it. And the plan was 50 pounds of gear and 50 pounds of food and water. And well, we didn't quite do that. We'll talk about that. Oops, one too far. So gear wise, this is the important stuff. I had lots of gear, but this is the biggie. InReach Explorer Plus GPS. I switched it from the basic plan, which is like $10 a month, to $60 a month. I had unlimited SMS text. I had SOS tied into the Iridium satellite system. There were many, in fact, most of the trip, my cell phone, if it worked, it was spotty coverage. My GPS worked all the time. I could get the weather off my GPS. My son had a deal where when I started the trip, I'd say on the river. And when I got off, I'd say off the river. Our joke was if I stayed any one place per my GPS and I didn't text him, he'd come up and get my boat. I said, not my body? He says, no, your body's not worth anything, Dad. We just want your boat. And I had it so that people could track me. And by golly, I had no idea that many people are tracking me. So it's a way that people can interact with you. And I highly recommend using a GPS of some type. Food, I lost 35 pounds on this trip, but I was eating like crazy. I used Mountain House. There's a story we'll go into at some point. Jet boil, and quickly I could make water, dump it into the Mountain House packets. You can do your own food, but I found these are convenient, high calorie, and work really, really well. I did have a solar panel. I had 3 power bricks I could charge up. But as it turns out, at least once a week, I was near some place I could plug in and recharge all my batteries. So the solar panel became a backup more than a primary use for things. Probably the number one big thing other than my tent was my MSR water bladders. I had 4 10-liter bladders. When I started the trip, I had all 4 filled. That's 80 pounds of water. That's called stupid. As it turns out, most of the trip, I reduced that down to 2 10-liter bags, 20 liters total. I run pretty dry, so I was drinking about and cooking with about 3 liters a day. So I could go 9 days on 20 liters of water. And there's always somebody. I was able to find somebody on the river, call a river angel. I was in a park. I never really got to a point where I had to go filter water. I had a water filter. I could have used it. I never did. And I would not recommend filtering water below Sioux City, mainly because it's just so dirty. Trying to get it to settle out and stuff is tough. There's plenty of water access if you just look at your maps and watch what you're doing. And then I'm going to miss a bunch of people, but the River Angel list that Norm has is amazing. These people are true angels. The story I like to tell, I was up on Lake Sac and a motorboat's coming directly at me, and I turn to one side and he turns that way, and I turn to another side and he turns that way. I thought, well, either I'm about to die, this person wants to talk to me. It was a river angel. This guy watches our GPS trackers. He knew where I was. He came out. He brought me a bag of cookies. He brought me 2 bottles of water. I didn't get his name, but he was just a godsend. It was just cool to meet all these river angels. And we're going to talk to about a lot of them as I go through this. Portaging. You better have a good portage cart. You're in Haven, getting ready to leave. Got my boat up on my portage cart. Want to make sure that portage cart can handle the loads you want. I like to load everything up and do it in one trip. I didn't really want to do multiple trips. And so in a kayak, that's a little more doable. And I also had solid tires. I didn't want to have to haul an air kit to try to blow up pneumatic tires. So make sure your portage cart is really, really good. Here's my home for 124 days. You can basically, this is how I ran the whole trip. That green bag in front, that's a 30-liter dry bag that had all my clothes and my bedding in it with my shoes on the front. I only had water shoes and sandals. That's all I took. I've got my deck bag with my solar panel and maps and things in that. And behind me, you can see the portage cart. And I put my tent in a dry bag. Watershed dry bags are bulletproof. I had it like that. You see my paddle there. That looks like I kind of sat out of the water really well. Well, that's because I'm sitting on the sandbar. I didn't have as much freeboard as I wish I did. One of the things that's cool is a lot of people on the trip said, make a playlist. Make sure that, you've got a long playlist, because if your song playlist is 10 songs, you'll have every single note memorized long before you get to the end. And so I had 1,000-song playlist. Now, when I paddle, I listen to the river because the river always talks, and you can tell a lot of things about current and things around you. But in camp, I would listen to music, and I had 1,000 songs. I had rap. I had Trans-Siberian Orchestra. I had country. You name it, I had it. On the way up to my buddy to drop me off at Three Forks, I'm sorry, Norm, but Montana radio stations leave a lot to be desired. And so we were playing my playlist, and the last song on there before we pulled it out of the radio and I took it with me was this song. I don't know how many recognize the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, but yeah, it was kind of ironic. So now for life, I am scarred. Every time I get into something a little sketchy, whether it's flatwater or whitewater, I've got Gordon Lightfoot singing in my head about wrecking their boat. So that was one of the fun, weird stuff that I ran into. The Missouri River is not what we know today is not the river of old. So if you look at this map, you'll notice there's no Great Lakes next to Minnesota and in that part of the region. And that's because before the ice sheets, everything drained north. Yellowstone up through the Red, everything went that direction into Hudson Bay. However, when the ice sheets came in, if you look at this, the southern edge of those ice sheets forced the Missouri to go east, and it turned into what we know as the longest river in the U.S. If you combine the Missouri and the Mississippi, it's the 4th largest river system in the world. It drains 10 states and 2 Canadian provinces. And one of the things I got a giggle out of is that usually if a river is a tributary, that means the river is the longest and has the most flow. Well, the Missouri is certainly longer than the Mississippi. And the Missouri, if you put back all the water we pull out for irrigation, has more flow than the Mississippi. So the Mississippi is a tributary to the Missouri. However, history was not kind, and we found the Mississippi first. So forever, the Missouri will always be the tributary to the Mississippi. So we're going to start down the river. So you start at Three Forks, you go down to James Kip. Beautiful. I'm going to have Norm help me out when we get to the Upper Missouri River National Wild and Scenic Area. That's basically Fort Benton down to Kip. Took me about 12 days, about 400 miles. Very intimate river up here. You go by 5 dams. Portage around these all by yourself. They're simple portages. Not necessarily easy, but fairly straightforward in what you've got to do. Here's a picture of the river. Gorgeous. This isn't an Iowa cornfield anymore. Mountains, trees, beautiful water. Here's a picture of Tonson Dam. It's the first one I went around. Tossin, thank you.
Austin.
And first dam, I thought this was a huge dam, and later on you're going to see there are a lot bigger dams. The first 3 weeks out rained on all the time. I was wet, miserably wet, but I also kind of slowed down a little bit. Again, I hate camping. I tried to always camp where there were pit toilets and picnic tables and a little bit of civilization. And the upper part, you can do that quite a bit, and it's very nice. Here's another weird thing out of the trip. I don't know how many people here like Pop-Tarts, but I love Pop-Tarts. Pop-Tarts make a great breakfast item when you're on the river, or pastries like an apple pie or something like that. After about 3 times of your Pop-Tarts going in and out of your stored hatches on your kayak, you no longer have Pop-Tarts, you have Pop-Tart crumble. And Pop-Tart crumble is just as good as Pop-Tarts. But I did learn some things. Probably one of the biggest areas I didn't do enough homework on was my food. I found out that Red Delicious apples turn to mush. Granny Smith's will last 3 weeks. And so you've got to really watch what you have for food and understand it's going to be bounced around and jostled a little bit. But yeah, I got to love Pop-Tart crumble. Wildlife. Oh my goodness. The wildlife on the upper is unbelievable. Upper left are black cormorants. Saw a lot of those. Never figured out on the upper right if that was a muley or a whitetail. A little later in the season, I would have been able to tell once I put a rack on it, or I could have got to see its tail. And there are turkeys everywhere. And again, since I didn't sing or do anything, it was the stroke of my paddle going down the river. I snuck up on lots of wildlife. So it was great to be up close and personal to see these. Eagles. I now understand why eagles are no longer in the endangered species list. I went back through my log. I saw at least 3,000 eagles the whole trip. There were eagles everywhere. You've seen on TV where the eagles are upside down battling each other. I got to see that in real life. That was a really cool moment. Couldn't get any pictures, but I got to see it. And then pelicans, just pelicans everywhere. Kind of neat to watch and neat to see. So lots of wildlife. First big lake I hit was Canyon Ferry. About killed me. Again, one of my other big mistakes was I ran the first 4 weeks without a kayak skirt over my cockpit cover. Mainly because I had put a high back chair to support my back paddling. And once I put that in the boat and I didn't retry my skirt, it didn't fit. So I'm running open cockpit. When I got past the delta where the river comes into Canyon Ferry Lake, there was a 25-mile-an-hour tailwind. And I thought I would just surf across these waves. Well, I weighed probably close to 300 pounds. You don't surf, you wallow. So I was taking on water about every 5th wave set. I went over to the Silos campsite and stopped for the day. It was perfect. I learned a lot about open boating that I didn't realize as a paddler. The next day I paddled the rest of the lake, about 25 miles. Took me about 10 hours. Thank goodness for Jim Emanuel and Will Garvin.
Yep.
And those guys got me around. But I learned really quick, if you get a southern wind, you just let the lakes do their thing, stay in camp, read, mend your gear, do stuff. But this was beautiful sights, but the lake was teaching me lessons. That 10 hours, 25 miles, I must have emptied the boat about 4 times. It just was crazy. Got down to Upper Hauser Lake. This is you can see beautiful sunsets. On the left, that is Spokane Bay. It is a camp area, pit toilets, picnic tables. You can only get in here with your boat. I think by the looks of it, I might have been the only one in there that season. It was gorgeous, wonderful place to camp. There's a lot of these on this section of the river where you don't have to bushwhack. You can camp on some very wonderful facilities. So you get down to Hauser, and Hauser Dam is interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about Dave Miller's book. But in Dave Miller's book, it says you portage on the left. Well, they've now put in a portage at Hauser's Dam. It's on River Right. What I found was interesting is I got to the portage, got out of my boat, got our things unloaded, put a boat on the portage cart. You portage across the dam. And I was thinking in this day and age in 9/11, they wouldn't let me get anywhere near infrastructure. I'm walking across the top of the dam and here come the dam workers. And I thought, I'm busted. And they stopped me and said, would you like any pictures? Can we tell you about the dam? Wonderful people up there. And so you walk across the dam and you can see on the lower left, then you follow a little path down to below the river. What's interesting is Mr. Hauser was the provisional governor of Montana at one point, and he formed a company to dam the river. You can see what's left of his dam. At this point, the Hauser Dam, the original Hauser Dam, was only one of 3 steel dams in the world. And he did a great job of anchoring the steel into the bedrock at either side of the gorge. But they built on gravel in the middle on footings. They did put volcanic ash on the upstream side with the idea that the water weight would settle that ash into basically concrete and the river couldn't do anything with it. Well, 1 year later, this is what the river did to the dam. It undercut the dam and blew it out. And there's a huge history. You should go and read it. It's very interesting. What was neat as a paddler is you can see the sheets of steel left on the dam. A bunch of that is still down the river in the first 2 miles. And if you're not careful, you can rip a boat to pieces. So you had to be careful just below the Hauser Dam for some pretty nasty pieces of steel. Easy to get around if you're looking for it and just keeping your eyes up, but a river hazard I was not expecting. So here is, I'm going back. This is called Gates of the Mountain. And Gates of the Mountain is amazing. There's no roads in here. The only way in here is by boat. And it's crazy. I wish I'd spent more days in here. Norm gave me this following picture. That was shot in around 1900. This was shot in 2022.
Could have been.
So Norm, what about this picture?
It could have been actually late 1800s, because I think the dam was built in 1911. So, but yeah, you could see that tree center on the left
right here.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to go back. Good pit.
Yeah,
watch,
so
everyone watch that tree.
Yeah, watch that tree. There it is now. It's still there. Probably
Still big.
20 years later. And you can see how high the water came up.
Yeah, it's so I didn't. And down in here, I'll go farther. One last look. Norm, this is such a cool picture. I'm so glad you pulled it up and I was able to get it. I've included in all the presentations, but the water is quite a bit higher now than when Lewis and Clark saw it. Down here in the middle on River Right, about 2 miles in, is something called John Coulter Camp Area. And it is a wonderful camp area. That's where I stayed. I should have stayed one more day. Just downstream of this is Man Gulch, where one of the first fire jumping crews perished. You can hike up to that. This is the picture on the right is the picture across from the campground, just unbelievably gorgeous. There's this pump, and I had plenty of water. I wasn't going to get water. I didn't realize there was water here, but between going back and forth from the edge of the river to my campsite, I got thirsty, so I took a drink. Took one drink from this old 1940s looking pump, went back to my camp, got my water bladders, drained all of them, dumped them all out and filled up. This is the purest water I have ever had. It's coming out of an aquifer. It's ice cold. There's no chemicals. This is the way water used to taste. And it is amazing. And the beauty is this is within a week or so, a couple of weeks of when you start. So you really, there's water there. And this water was, I cried when I ran out of water. This was just amazing water. Norm, anything else on the Gates of the Mountain?
Not that it's really important, but it's kind of nice not to be down there on the weekend because it is heavy motorboat traffic and fishermen. So if you can kind of plan a trip through there Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's a lot more pleasant than the hundreds of jet skis that can be down there on a Saturday.
And I think the hiking in here is got to be amazing. The
hiking. Dave mentioned Man Gulch. Author Norman McLean wrote a book called Young Men of Fire. He also wrote A River Runs Through It. His book, Young Men of Fire, is about the Man Gulch fire, in which I think 13 firefighters were killed in the late 40s. And it's definitely worth hiking up there because they have a plaque or like a marble stone with each person's name on where their body was found. And very interesting. Nice hike.
Well worth staying here for a couple of days. I wish I had, but yeah, I'm going back. This is one spot I've told my son we're going back up and we're going to paddle through this on like a 3-day overnight kind of thing. So that takes you down to Holter Dam. On the left, it's on river left is where the portage is. Big, nice gravel road, really nice to come down, easy to get around. And of course, 2 things I was worried about on this trip were ticks and snakes. Hadn't found a tick yet, but then I found this guy, about stepped on him. I lived in California for about 4 years and I know how to hike around snake country. You don't step over things without looking. You don't reach into areas. You're very careful. But I was tired that day, and luckily this wasn't a rattlesnake. He is a bull snake or a gopher snake, and he's not poisonous. He was about 5 foot long, gorgeous yellowy color, posed for pictures. First snake I saw, but it reminded me I've got to keep my brains on as I'm doing this trip, because you don't want to get into a situation where you find rattlesnakes, because there are rattlesnakes along the trip. The other interesting thing is once you get below Holter is 7,000 trout per mile. I quit counting dories, fishing dories with fly fishermen in them at 50. It was like a slalom course. They were everywhere. Just catching 5 to 8 pound browns and rainbows, throwing them back. I'm thinking, wow, I could have eaten them. Gorgeous up here. Water quality is great. On the left, that is Pruitt Creek, and that's where Sergeant Ordway, as part of Lewis and Clark. Norm, tell me if I get this right. They buried 3 canoes and dug them up on the way back, correct?
Incorrect.
Incorrect. Okay. I know Ordway was here and they camped. What?
I don't recall that.
Okay. I thought that I had read that they had 3 canoes buried here, and they dug them up for the return trip home.
No,
They had them stashed.
No, I'm gonna feel bad if I'm wrong.
That's okay. I'll have to do some more looking. Gorgeous campsite, guys. The only downside is the trout fishermen use this heavily. There's only a few campsites, so you kind of hit and miss. I was lucky I got the last campsite. You're camping on gravel, but still wonderful place. There's a restaurant across the road. Just a great place to talk to fishermen and just hang out for a night. Fire rings, portable pit toilets, just a great place. And beavers. I saw beavers everywhere. I got really bummed. I won't tell the whole story, but if you know Pink Floyd's song, Another Brick in the Wall, there's a line that says, "Teacher, leave those kids alone." Well, I turned that into beavers, leave those trees alone. I have the whole song about beavers and trees if you ever want to hear about it. But they would girdle some of these magnificent cottonwoods, trying to bring them down. And my naturalist friend says this is probably a youngster who got carried away with a little more tree than they could handle. But you would see this periodically going down the river. But a lot of beaver sign, a lot of beavers in the water. It's very interesting to see them. Prairie dogs. So lots of prairie dogs. What's interesting is when the river cuts away to the bank, you can see their tunnels here. And the reason I know it's prairie dogs and not like cliff swallows is here on the, can you guys see, Norm, can you see my cursor?
Yeah. So
right here, you can see where the river is actually opened up instead of a hole, because birds would only make a hole. This is part of the prairie dog's tunnel.
Well,
so the prairie dogs are, whoops, come back here. So the prairie dogs are just on the edge, and it was interesting to see them and hear them whistle and chatter. But another piece of the wildlife you get to see as you go down river. And I got this picture from Norm. This is one of the Great Falls. This is now underwater behind a dam. As a whitewater paddler, I can see a lion here. I would start over here and I'd come down and I'd go this way and come down. Unfortunately, I'll never get the chance to do that. In our haste for water power and to tame the rivers, we put these behind dams. I really believe if the falls at Great Falls were still there, they would rival Niagara as a tourist attraction. These are amazing natural features, and they're just buried right now. Maybe someday, who knows? We're doing a lot of stuff to bring things back. The city of Great Falls really doesn't want you going around portaging individually around their dams, and they've got a number here. You can see the portage sign. You can call for a portage, but luckily River Angels Jim and Phyllis, they'll come and take you down. Got me down here on the right. That's Carter's Ferry. It's one of 3 operating ferries in Montana, and put you here, and from here you go down toward Fort Benton, and amazing river views. Huge bluffs where the river's been cutting away for hundreds of years. River's fast, a lot of wildlife, just amazing area. And then when you get into Fort Benton, at the north end of camp, or the upstream end of camp, there's a campground, and they have showers. Oh, they have showers. First time I had a shower other than rinsing off the river in about 3 weeks. Showers, I could go into town. beautiful sunsets. Tent there. We'll talk more about tents in the middle of this. Was able to visit the interpretive center, got some updates from some maps, got to learn about a lot of history they don't teach in school. I know on the return trip for Lewis and Clark, the Nez Perce befriended Lewis and Clark and helped them out. And some of you may know the story of Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce. The Army tried to move them into a reservation, and they made a run for, he and his group made a run for the Canadian border, didn't make it. But on the river, you actually go by Cow Island, and that's one place where Chief Joseph and his band raided a storage area and got the stuff they needed and burned it to the ground. But his rifle is in here that he used. And I think the famous line, at least I paraphrase it, goes something like, "I will fight as the sun goes down, I will fight no more forever." And they talk about a lot of the history. And it's really sad that Lewis and Clark's trip may never have been successful. It wasn't for their help. And yet 30, 40 years later, we turn around and do something pretty awful. So interesting history. You luckily get to see both sides of it. I thought it was great. I did laundry, picture on the right. Great to get clean clothes. Excuse me. I was getting a little ripe by that part of the trip. And the geology going down here. This is a vein of coal down near coal banks. Toward the latter half of the steamboat era, they would go and chip coal out of here and use that to fire up their boilers instead of wood. And you can still see some spots when you go and look. Just wonderful geology. Got down to coal banks, and coal banks was the last place for water. I set up my camp, turned around and saw this sign and thought, oh, great. I set up on, Rattlesnake Central. And I went and asked the ranger, and he says, no, that sign's just to remind you we share the outdoors with a lot of little creatures. Just keep your eyes out. Norm, give me some stuff. We're going to go through a little more, but what's the history to coal banks? I know it's got good wells. Is that because they're deep?
No, I think there's just some drainages that come in there, like a little sandy creek. And I think that's a shallow little aquifer where they pump water out. The coal banks used to be a landing stop for steamboats. At low water, they couldn't get to Fort Benton, and they would unload all the steamboats here and wagon them, or wagon the supplies to Fort Benton. And it was also a jumping off point for supplying Fort Assiniboine, which I believe is on the Canadian border. And again, they would unload the steamboats there and haul supplies north by wagon. And also some of the steamboats would get some of that low grade coal that you saw, those coal veins, but they realized didn't really have a lot of oomph like some of the Eastern US coal has. So they didn't really rely on that. It was probably more of a last ditch effort for coal. But those that paddle the Missouri Breaks National Monument, which is one of the most popular flat water destinations in the United States, 90% of the people start at coal banks. So it's a good chance you're going to run into a lot of other paddlers here.
And again, I paddled, I wanted a low water year and I got it. And here is the landing at coal banks. Yeah. So I had no motor traffic. You couldn't get the motorboats out. It was very, very thin.
Yeah.
It made it a pain to get your boat in and out. But the upside there was that. And basically Fort Benton to Kip is the Missouri break section. It's 150 miles. And in low water year, this was the only place I was going to get potable water. So I did fill my water bags up. As it turns out, I got through there in 5 days. I didn't need 3 full bags of water. 2 would have been just fine. So I was carrying a little extra weight. Norm, I don't know what it is, but it's spectacular. Do you know what this feature is called?
No, but it's the start of the, I'm not sure it has a name. It's the start of the Eagle Creek Formation sandstone, which comprises of the Missouri Breaks. So it's basically 150-foot layer of ancient seabed sediment when that entire area was under an ocean. And
Gaze, this is the views you're getting. It's cool. The next one I'm going to throw back to Norm. That's hole in the wall. So
Yep.
Very famous. Norm,
Same
any
rock.
tidbits about it?
Yes, same rock. So you notice the formation, the white rock is now further up, meaning the river's dug itself underneath and is a lot lower than the formation. And if you see that hole, you notice the hole on the upper right. It's a lot bigger than it looks. There is a hiking trail. When I guide canoe trips down there, we take people inside that hole, and you can probably get about 4 people standing in that hole. It's pretty scary and pretty sketchy. It's only about 5 feet, 4 feet wide, and it drops off either side really steep. And that really dark rock in front of it that cuts through that's called a dike, and that's molten rock that is oozed its way through cracks of the earth and worked its way and solidified into the rocks. And you'll see a lot of those dikes, which is actually, it's called shonkonite. It's basically a form of basalt. Really cool hike.
And this is the second place hello?
Did you go up there?
No, I did not go up there, Norm. That's what said, I want to go spend some more time here, because I didn't speed through here, but I didn't really take any hikes. I stayed in camp and relaxed. And here at Hole in the Wall, they've got I think I've got a picture of some of the campgrounds. They've got some beautiful camping areas, and just do the day hikes out of here. This is amazing. It's just, so yeah, Gates of Mountains #1, the Missouri Breaks is #2. And then Norm, this was probably the one feature I was the most impressed with. To me, that looks like an all volcanic core, but
Yep.
I don't know, but it's gorgeous.
Same kind of rock, shonkonite, and it's called Black Butte. And if anyone's been to like Devil's Tower in South Dakota, very similar features. That it's like a volcanic plug, giant. Magma's worked its way through the Earth's crust, and over time, everything else erodes around it.
Norm, are there hikes to the top or
Yep.
hikes around that?
Yep, that whole ridge to the left, off that ridge, that
Over
green
here?
ridge, yep, and it worked its
Okay.
way all the way over to Black Butte Camp. It looks farther than it is, but believe it or not, you can get up there in about an hour.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyone doing the river, I did not. I wish I'd spent a little more time. I was happy with the time I was there, but I want to spend more time in here. It is just, it's amazing. 150 miles of water. It's just very, very cool stuff. And here's one of the camps. They have pit toilets. Some of them have some built-in shelters for weather. This is Slaughter River. I was soaked this day. I looked like a drowned kitten. Rolled in, and unfortunately there was already 2 boats there, and I thought, I bet I missed out on getting a shelter. And they saw me pop up, and I said, you got both shelters taken? They said, yeah. And I said, okay, no problem. And I was going to go camp further away, and they said, no, come on back. We'll get into one shelter. And so between the 2 groups and myself, we shared the 2 shelters for about an hour and a half, and then it stopped raining. Sun came out, put up our tents, and I sat around the fire. I shared my food. Those guys had s'mores. We just had the people you get to meet that are doing out on the river, having fun. It's just neat to meet all these people as you go down and exchange stories. And I got all their email addresses. They signed my log book, because I had a log that I wrote in every day and recorded lots and lots of stuff. And I was able to send them emails at the end and tell them I had finished, and we got to talking. So you make some lifelong friends. Yep. So on the way down to Fort Peck Lake, you have, since it's a low water year, this is the kind of camping areas I had, and they are awesome. Lots of sand, very few mosquitoes. I've had very few buggy days, luckily, but this was very typical for where I'd be out and about. Water quality. Yeah, I know there's chemicals in the water. As a materials engineer, I could talk to you about all day long, but my paddle is 3 feet underwater. The clarity of the water, even though the Missouri is known for being big muddy, is unbelievable. We'll talk more about that between today and next week's talk, but I would have no issues filtering this water. It was just beautiful to paddle on. And that takes us down to the dams. Now the big boys. This is Fort Peck Lake, all the way down to Lewis and Clark. You got to go through 6, Fort Peck, Lake Sac, Lake Oahe, Lake Sharp, Lake Francis Case, and Lewis and Clark. Whoops, I missed one spelling right here. I got to change that around. And then Sioux City. This was a good chunk of the trip. This was almost 2 months and about 1,200 miles. So you spend a lot of time in here. And what people may or may not know is, the most destructive flood in our nation's history was the Mississippi flood of 1927. And that was at a time when there were no levees, no dikes. Most of the towns were on the river. And the water event back then must have been unbelievable because the cities were small. We weren't running, runoff didn't go straight into the rivers. So this water event had to be massive. But out of that, Congress said, we never want to see floods again. So Corps of Engineers, we authorize you to go to the Missouri River and build dams, and we'll never have any floods, except for 1999 and 2008, 2011, and 2019. Dams don't stop flooding. And unfortunately, we've learned that the hard way. Now we have these dams. The dams do have both positive and negative effects, but the source of all the dams was this great flood, which then we, in our thinking at the time, thought dams would solve it. This is Fort Peck. Started in 1933, finished it in 40. It is the world's largest hydraulically filled dam. That means they take sand and gravel, liquefy it, pump it where they need it, and then pump all the water out. I think the cool thing is there's more coastline on this lake than California. And for a paddler, that's not cool because all these little arms you see up here, it is 2 or 3 miles across these arms. And up here at Dry Arm, this big piece here, it's nearly 10 miles across, 10 to 15 across here. So you really have to be careful and on what the weather is doing. Down here, this is called UL Bend. This area here, this is where the mussel shell comes in. The water was so low this last year that there's a campground I wanted to hit. You couldn't get to those mud flats. So you kind of get through this area, then you get up into the lake and you watch your weather. On my GPS, I could tell when I was going to have a wind shift, say from the southeast to the northwest. And you plan that so when, which side of the lake do you want to be on? You don't want to be caught out in the middle of this lake during high winds. So you pay a lot of attention to your weather, either through your weather apps on your phone or GPS. I was using my GPS because it worked much, much better. Here's a very typical camp out on the shores of Lake Peck. As you can see how low the water is, at one point water was clear up here in a normal year. It was a good 20 feet low on the lake, made for just awesome camping. I didn't have to break everything down. I could just put the boat on the shore and go have fun. And wildlife. This is a camp down at the Pines. It's one of the camp area where there's pit toilets and stuff. Ospreys sitting on a nest, and wonderful to watch them. They had chicks on the nest. Every 30 minutes, they'd bring a fish up, and mom and dad would go off and fish, and mom was feeding the chicks. And wonderful cactus. I was worried about snakes, and then I also, when I was walking around, made sure I didn't step on one of these and put a thorn through my foot. So not just the wildlife that can bite, some of the plant life can bite. Takes you down to Lake Sac. Lake Sac is awesome. Very interesting to see. Started in 47, finished in 54. Is the 5th largest earthen dam in the world, about 170 miles long. For the most part, I did well on Lake Sac. I didn't have a whole lot of issues here. So right below the dam at Fort Peck, you're still on river before you get downstream into the backwater where the water backs up for Lake Sac. I had really badgered Norm a little bit. This, Norm tells me, is one of the boats, one of the barges used to help build the dam. And they just left it out here. I thought it was a steamboat, but Norm, this is a barge, correct?
It was a dredging barge. So they would have like a dredging scoop on top that would probably, when they were first doing the dam, dig and channel through it and utilizing the sand from wherever to use part of the dam. There's another one actually downstream of that too. There's some second
on
one.
River right.
River left, I think.
I missed it then. Nope, I missed that one. There was a wreck on River left. I should have got more pictures of. cool. And again, low water year, you get to see some of this history, and it was very cool to paddle up to it and took a lot of pictures. Could tell it was old by the steel and some of the construction. So very cool to see. And of course, this I thought, because as a kid in Iowa, we were always hearing about the Mississippi, but the picture on the left is what the riverboat captains called a deadhead. And there are over 300 wrecks on the Missouri of steamboats. And cottonwoods are the #1 cause. You look at these, the captains were very careful keeping their eyes out. They didn't want to run into these, because what you see on the left is what you could see. And like an iceberg, on the right is what's underwater. You have a massive old cottonwood tree still attached, buried down in the sand. And if a riverboat hit these, even though they drafted, Norm, how much would a riverboat draft? 3-4 inches? I mean, very low draft, weren't they?
Much. Yeah, not much.
Yeah, they would gut themselves when they hit these things. It's you look at that. I really, the riverboat captains that made it up to Fort Benton, amazing people. I understand why there's 300 wrecks, but the ones that made it, unbelievable guys on the river. Just really, really respect what they did. Here's a camp down at Lake Sac, still coming down to the lake. This was where a creek came in. Wonderful place to camp that night. Great. Got up in the morning and saw these. These weren't there when I went to bed at night. One of the things that gets to be fun is you get up and start taking pictures of around your campsite. These are coyote tracks. And apparently at some point of the night, a coyote went through my camp and left these wonderful tracks. I'm guessing my snoring scared him away, but I had raccoons, I had coyotes, I had skunks, I had all sorts of critters going by my camp at night, not looking for food. I made sure I had my food put away. I wasn't attracting animals. I was just part of the scenery, and they were going by me. So very cool to see. A lot of places you saw some of the groves that had been ravaged by some of the fires that had been in Montana, and huge sentinels here, old cottonwood groves that didn't survive the fires that had been burned. And eventually the river will pull these in and drop them. One of the other things I think is really cool, and I learned this from Dave Miller's book, is you can date the bridges as you go down the river, because if a bridge was built during or before the riverboat age ended, which had been, Norm, would be the end of the riverboat era?
When was it? Oh boy, I'm not sure.
Late
1895.
Yeah. And this bridge, of course, they required that the bridges allow riverboat traffic, the steamboats, to come up. And so you can see on either side here these big, huge counterweights. And in Dave Miller's book, they said this bridge has been operated once. The day it was built, so the Corps would buy off, they raised the bridge and brought it back down, and it hasn't moved since. And as an engineer, I sure hope someone's looking at the steel cables, because this is a lot of weight to be hanging in the air for 100 some odd years. Beautiful bridge when you go under it. I took a picture of every single railroad bridge I did on the way down. It was just amazing to see these bridges and the old construction and what they're built out of. It's just very cool seeing. Here is my worst camp ever for the whole entire trip. This is just downstream about 2.5, 3 hours from where the Yellowstone meets the Missouri. If you remember, in 2022, the Yellowstone had historic flooding. I was out there when that happened. I was a week behind the high point of when the Yellowstone peaked. I had several friends get very worried about, hey, we need to come get you. And I said, no, you don't. I'm okay. I'm behind the surge. And yeah, when I got below where the confluence of the Yellowstone was, I went from 5 miles per hour to 8 miles per hour. And I was so happy. At about 5 o'clock, when I started looking for a campground, I realized all my campsites are underwater. This is not going to be fun. And so I found this. Missouri River mud is special, very special. You don't want to get out. If you get in much past your knees, you may have trouble getting out. This was about calf high. It's the only time I took drinking water and rinsed down, because it was just a mess. Mosquitoes were a mess, but luckily I only had one night of this, because the next day I got to Tobacco Gardens Marina. And I tell you, River Mom Peggy, awesome. They have this little cabin. You get to stay on a mattress. There's showers. There's the restaurant there. I went out with their crews and helped work around the park and split wood and tend fire rings. It was my first resupply. I was also able to pack up about 20 to 30 pounds of gear that I was not using, and Peggy was able to help me get that mail back. So it was a really good spot. It's about 4 weeks in, and it's a great spot to kind of take a break and then get your resupply going and get ready. So the next day I got out on Lake Sac, and luckily I ran into a fishing boat, and they said, you got weather coming in. And you can see in the distance, I've got a storm brewing. So I made sure I was back off the lake quite a bit. And this is where your tent must withstand 50 to 70 mile an hour winds, not just once, multiple times. About 1 a.m, I woke up, this storm went through, my tent was flat. And I said, well, I hope I'm still here in the morning. Woke up in the morning, and thank goodness for aluminum tent poles. They were bent, but I didn't break, and I was dry. So when you're getting a tent for your trip, make sure this tent is really durable to high weather. And also I would bring along a set of sand stakes, because the little stakes they give you may not hold in some of the ground that you're putting things into. But this was one of 3 storms that I was able to weather. Remember, I had a little bit of cell phone coverage here. My friends in Iowa were saying, hey, we just had a storm that came through out of the Dakotas. It had 5 tornadoes in Iowa. And I said, and they said, well, yeah, we got down in all our cellars and stuff. I said, yeah, I rode that one out in my tent. I go, oh, that's right. So you get to have some fun out here. You're back to you're not in civilization anymore. No place to hide. The geology along Lake Sac is amazing. This rock, I took my lunch breaks wandering the shores, taking pictures of fossils and looking at the geology. Just amazing geology. Just really, really cool to see. Let's see, did it come on? There we go. Second place, I got down to Dakota Waters. Amber and Thomas, wonderful river angels. I pulled in on July 5th. They were doing their fireworks, and I got to be one of their security guys. I made sure people weren't going past one of the gates, and I was up close, so I got to take wonderful pictures of just a fantastic fireworks display. Stayed a couple days, showers, food, a little bit of relaxation. And again, the people you meet on this trip are just awesome, awesome. Then you get to Oahe. I hate Oahe. I'm never going back to visit Oahe ever again. They started the dam in 48, finished it in 59, is the 4th largest reservoir in the US. And if you start from the dam there at Sac and go all the way down to the finished dam on Oahe, it's 260 miles. The first good chunk, there's a chunk of miles in there, you're still on the river, at least down to Bismarck. Once you get past Bismarck, you start to get backed into the lake. And the problem with Oahe, and a lot of paddlers, this finishes their trip. This lake is positioned north and south. Most of the wind comes out of the south this time of year in June and July. And I had spent, I think, 3 or 4 windbound days. You just set. There is no reason to go out and spend 10 hours going 8 miles. You just sit and wait, let the wind will drop, look at your weather, and get by. But I got through it, but it can mentally, it tests you a little bit. And in the middle of this, State Line Marina, KJ and the guys down there, just wonderful people. It's a good spot to stay and rest, and it's right on the lake and just great. This is a picture up at Sugar Bottom. I was still learning on how to deal with lakes, and you can see looking north, I had weather coming in, and I looked at my radar. I had cell phone coverage, and I assumed that the storm was going to go east. The storm did not go east. It went south. And so I'm on the river. This baby's rolling in. What you can see here, this is my kayak. There's my shoes, my green bag. This dark lump is the biggest cottonwood tree I could find out in the river. There's no place to go as the storm rolled in. So this cottonwood tree, and where's my bag? Right there. That cottonwood tree and I had the most wonderful conversation for 45 minutes while this baby is raining and thunder and lightning. I only made that mistake once. The next couple times this happened, if I could see weather coming, I would stay in camp until I knew where that weather was going, rather than get caught out in the elements. Came out of this just fine, but it's not something I wanted to repeat. Again, Oahe does have some of the most awesome sunsets. This is a picture from State Line Marina. Just a wonderful, wonderful place to be. And equally, as you go down Oahe, you have moonrises, and just you're the only one out here getting to enjoy this most of the time. And yeah, there's this down at Mobridge. I can't tell you how bad I wanted pizza. I wanted pizza so bad, but the river is so low. Trying to get up and get to Pizza Ranch would have been a mess. And I don't even like Pizza Ranch pizza, but at this time, if I could have got there, I would have. So yeah, pizza just wasn't going to happen this time. One of the neat things of Oahe is, though, it's huge pasture ground. This is a herd of horses. I got to see horses and cattle. Gives you a little bit of a view of maybe what the buffalo herds would roam and graze, and as the Native American tribes would follow along over this country. You could sit back and look at it as if you were sitting there 200 years ago. That takes you down to Lake Sharp. The interesting thing about Lake Sharp, started in 59, finished in 63, is right down here is called Big Bend. And there is a portion here where the river cannot grind through whatever this chunk of rock is. The neck right here is about a mile. And you can portage over that, but I'm on a paddling trip. And I've been talking to people. John Johnson portaged that and said it was the most ugly portage on the planet. Don't do it. So I got lucky. When I got off the dam up here, and at Piers, right where you get around the dam, River Angels, Paul and Sally, I knew I was going to stay a day because I had 25-mile-an-hour winds out of the south. River was going to be a mess. And it was also 108. Okay, I don't know what's wrong with South Dakota, but 108. What's wrong with this state? But luckily, Paul came down and got me. He said, come on up to the RV. So I was able to hide out in RV air conditioning while it was just ugly, ugly hot. A bunch of the South Dakota folks I met here and got to go in and get food, eat at the restaurant. So I took a day or two here. I was able to get down Lake Sharp in 2 days. I had the day I left, I had a 5-mile-an-hour tailwind, which unheard of and very welcome. Here's Paul and Sally. Love these two. They look out for the river paddlers, take care of them in ways we should never be taken care of. It's just awesome, the people you meet on the river. Here was my one camp on Lake Sharp. Wasn't much sand, but I had gone 54 miles. I was running out of daylight, so I packed it in here. A lot of mosquitoes. I look like a dork in my bug suit, but I would recommend having a bug suit, at least the top half. That keeps the mosquitoes off you, and the bottom half actually keeps the flies off you on some of the sandbars. It works pretty well. One of the things I ran into Lake Sharp is zebra mussels. I've seen these before and knew about them, but they are in the lakes. What you see here, the zebra mussels will attach to a lot of man-made structures, inlet pipes, outlet pipes, and can cause considerable damage. What I think is worse is they do kill off some of our native mussels, like this one here. They attach here, and this mussel can't operate anymore, and he dies. They are responsible for cleaning up some of the water quality in the Great Lakes. They are very efficient in terms of filtering water and removing things. But we do have zebra mussels, and I made sure that when I portaged off lakes, my boat was clean and dry, and at least I tried to rinse out a little bit, knowing if I had water sources to not try to take anything downstream with me. That puts you on Francis Case and Fort Randall Dam. Started in 46, finished in 54, the 11th largest reservoir, 108 miles. Lake is not as big, starting to get shorter, starting to get the feel. You can get off the lakes. And here's a good picture. What I would consider the biggest danger in Lake Francis is the tree farms. These are trees that were there, and then they filled the lake. And many of the through paddlers, or several, have had been out in this when it was windy. And you can see I'm paddling on glass, so it was easy to get through here. But if a wave would pick you up and drop you on one of these stumps, your boats are so heavy that it just punch a hole through your boat. And sometimes that ends your trip. So on Francis Case, you have to be careful of the tree farms. This is a Chamberlain. Unbelievably cool campground. There's about 40 feet up the ramp to this tent campsite. I could walk into town, another place to do some resupply, get water, relax, lots of shade, beautiful place. Stayed here a couple of days. It was just awesome. And that takes you down to Lewis and Clark, down to Gavin Point's Dam. They started in 52, finished 57. I'm only about 800 miles upstream now of St. Louis. I'm starting to feel it. I am probably the only person on the planet that is happy that COVID happened. The Mississippi, their Missouri River Paddlers, or MORP, has a rendezvous every 5 years. And they were supposed to have a rendezvous in 2020. And because of COVID, they delayed it till 2022. And I was unbelievably fortunate to get to join the rendezvous on the way through. Amazing bunch of people. I had not really decided how to finish my trip, but we're going to talk about that next Wednesday. But they gave me, talking with Dave Forbes and Amanda and Jim Emanuel, and I could go on. The people and what they've gone through really helped me form what I want to do this is the campsite. We spent a day here as a group. But Norm, what was it? 70 paddlers from how many states and stuff?
Yeah, I think we had 70 paddlers, but there was 100 people at the start from 21 states.
Just
and 50% of them had done the entire river, so which is really cool.
And to tag into their memories and what they went through and things they liked and didn't like, it really helped me pick out parts of the trip and things I wanted to do. And then there's this. So the beauty is Norman had already, as one of the organizers, the South Dakota cruise, and Dave Miller had figured out where we're going to stay. So we stayed at Springfield, and this storm rolled in. And, normally I'd already been through 2 storms. This was my 3rd, but nobody was worried about this storm. They had all been through worse. We had 70-mile-an-hour winds come through. That's not my tent. I don't know whose tent that is, but we lost a few tents in this. The storm rolls through, there's hail, it's crazy. It stops, everyone gets out, everyone starts helping, everyone fix up what's broke, and we're all ready to go. It's just a neat to watch, just a study in human behavior. All the paddlers on this trip had seen far worse. This was just another occurrence of something to deal with in a calm and collected manner. I was paddling with Mike from Eau Claire. He and we both paddle about the same stroke rate. His tent was flattened. Everything he owned was completely wet. He probably got 10 minutes of sleep that night. But as Mother Nature gives, takes away, it also gives. So the next day, we get down to Lewis and Clark to the end. This is me being a 4th grader. I was hugging trees and no more lakes. I've never been so happy in my life. But it was 104 that day. And you didn't feel it on the water, but when you got up on the shore, it was roasting. Mike laid his gear out. And 10 minutes later, he was completely dry. 104, no humidity is amazing to dry out. So we were completely soaked, but the next day everybody got to dry out and we were back to being comfortable. And there's lots of trees and shade. So this was a wonderful place for the MORP crew to come in. And the South Dakota folks helped us get around this dam. If you can imagine 70 paddlers with boats that are $1,500 to $20,000 a piece, or $1,500 to $2,000 a piece, or like the boat Norm was paddling. I mean, it's an heirloom. This is the boat he did on his trip. You don't want these boats damaged. They got us all around with no incidents within 2 hours on the next day. It was South Dakota folks are just awesome. It was great to have them hook in and help out with MORP. It was really fun. And of course, that leaves Sioux City on the way down from there. This was another thing. This was what I was really pumped up because Norm had told me about it. This is the North Alabama. This is a steamboat wreck that is still in place. You can get up close and personal. If you look up here, here's the deadhead that sank the boat. It is still there. So it's neat to see how this ran up in the ground in low water years. You're able to see this. This is next to Goat Island. And we got to see this. I stayed at Goat Island. There's a couple places during MORP you could stay. Mike and I stayed out here on Goat Island, starting to get an idea of what the big sandbars are going to be like. It was a great place to camp. Wonderful sand, no mosquitoes, few flies, just great place. And that's it for my portion of the trip. Well, next Wednesday, we're going to start from here and go on down to the Gulf. But at this point, I'm going to stop sharing. That is one of those wonderful sunsets you get to see. I'm going to stop and at this point, Norm and I and other people that have done the trip that are on here, if you want to ask questions about, especially the 2023 people that are going to do this trip, if we can help out anyway, we'd try to help out.
Yeah, let's do it. So who's got a question?
Well, you covered some of it there. I'm planning on doing it this year, starting June 1st. But food, I'm right now I'm really kind of concentrating on food and what to bring and all of that. And actually last week I went down a rabbit hole of air dried meats and all of the various different air dried meats out there. But yeah, so you said you brought 50 pounds. What
Yeah,
kind of a breakdown on that?
well, let me give you a story because this is hilarious. So I had bought at Hy-Vee at our local grocery store, I had bought packets of like salmon or tuna, and then I bought Knorr noodles, you know, the green package, Knorr. And I was up at Woodhawk's bottom. That was a day I got stuck because of a high wind. We had gale force winds. And I walked in there the night I walked in, I looked like a drowned kitten. Again, I was getting rained on. I was hypothermic. And whatever group was there, they looked at me and said, "You're camping with us." They just said, "Stop here, camp." And we all, you know, were pretty much bagged down for the day. And that evening, we all got out, the wind stopped. We're sitting around the camp, around the picnic table cooking. And they're all cooking boiling water, and they pour it into their little food pouches. They had Mountain House. I proceed to boil water and dump my Knorr packet in to boil my noodles. And to a person in unison, they said, "Oh, you have to do dishes." What was amazing was, and this was something I hadn't thought of, I could boil water in 2 minutes, but then I spent fuel to cook the food for another 4 minutes. And then I had to do dishes. So I'm using fuel and water, and I didn't need to. I know that buying prepaid meals is expensive. Mountain House is not cheap, but there were many times, you know, I boiled water and then pour it into the pouch, zip it closed, and you're done. It saved me 3 times. I was able to have a hot meal before a storm hit. And from Woodhawk Bottom, literally 2/3 of the trip, I went through 1 tank of gas. I just using it for 2 minutes. You don't need to haul 3 or 4 cylinders because it just minimizes, you know, you're not doing dishes. You don't ever just boil water in the cup, pour it and stuff. So I switched over to Mountain House. The rest of that story is that morning that group left Woodhawk Bottom, and I was a little later getting going. When I got down to my kayak, here's 2 Mountain House packages in my kayak. How nice of them to do that. And I tried them and I said, "Wow, this is great." So when I was up at Tobacco Garden, I told my son Josh, I said, "Hey, we're changing plans. We're going to Mountain House." And he goes out on the web and says, "Oh, look, they've got all these kind of meals." I said, "Well, tell me what kind of meals I can get." And he goes, "You'll find out, Dad." Luckily, he knows what I like to eat. Amazing. And so I had Mountain House packets. I also had beef jerky, Cheetos, animal crackers. I ate about 1,500 calories a day. For breakfast, it would be Pop-Tarts or a pastry or a bar. I don't paddle well on foods during the day. It would just be a power bar. And then I ate a lot at night. I don't know. Ann's on here too. Ann did her big Mississippi trip. And Annie, but I've got 2 Anns out there. I don't know what their thoughts are, but I think to me, it was very easy just to spend the money, get the packets, and then just do the little bit of add-ons. Took up less room, high calories, worked well for me. Ann or Annie, what'd you guys experience?
Hey, I'm Annie.
Annie. Whoops, sorry, I muted you. Annie,
Okay.
there you
Hey,
go.
yeah, I'm doing the trip too. I'm putting in I think the 6th, but we will be up there. We've got reservations up at the campground there for the 4th and 5th at the Missouri headwaters. But as far as food goes, you know, I don't do well with a lot of the dehydrated stuff because of the sodium content. But I found a company called Stowaway Gourmet, and this guy does like bear and bison, and it's just really good meals. And also Next Mile meals, or a couple women out of California that do all organic, you know, low sodium stuff. So I've loaded up on that. And that was kind of my question as to how much to really pack, because I'm always thinking plan B, C, D, you know, if I get, you know, windbound or whatever, or stuck in a mud flat, or, you know, something happens where, you know, I'm not making it on time. But what I was planning was to take 30 meals and then resupply with Peggy. My husband was gonna send a box to Peggy and also send a box to Sally at the Oahe Dam. Would that? would
Yeah,
those be two-
I had a month worth at any given time. I had a month's worth of food. I never ran out of food, and it wasn't, that wasn't a weight issue. But
Right,
water
well,
is.
you
but,
did 1,500 calories, dude. That's not enough in a day, if you
I
ask
know.
me. But
I-
anyway,
I did just
I
fine,
know
other
you
than I
are.
got skinny.
I know, but and then I also am doing what Janet had recommended. I bought the Spiz powder that is like a new, a meal in itself, and it's supposed to give you all your vitamins and energy. And she said that really gave her a boost to get, across from point A to point B. So I'm planning on doing that in the morning, coffee and, a shake and heading
I'm
out.
not a coffee
Yeah,
drinker.
try that Spiz out before you go. I've tried that on a couple races, and it doesn't set well with me. And there's various different
Yeah.
brands out there too that some work better than others for people. It sits
Right.
better. Spiz does not work for me. It totally messes up my stomach.
Well, and Andy brought up a good point. I didn't have it on the above St. Louis, but below St. Louis, when it really got hot, I didn't watch my electrolytes, and so I was talking to my River Angels about Gatorade, and so depending on the temperature, my electrolytes were bouncing a little bit, and I took care of it. But I haven't planned that as well as I should have. So if it's going to be hot, that's one thing to very much pay attention to, because it will wear you down. You won't feel as good on the river as you could.
Yeah, I am planning on bringing some packets to add to water jugs on that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, you did the Mississippi. I mean, what'd you do for food?
For breakfast, I had those, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of them, but it's Meal Belly. They're called Meal Belly meals to go. And they're just super high power bars. They've got a lot of fat, a lot of protein, just a lot of everything. So they're 600 calories a piece. So I would just have half before I even got in the canoe or my kayak. And then, during the morning, I would snack on that. And those were great. I also brought some granola stuff so I wouldn't get tired of that. But, and then for suppers, I had a lot of the instant, the Mountain House and, all those where you just add water. And I liked that. I got tired of them, but it's so easy for cleanup, and I didn't go through much fuel. And Dave, how much fuel did you say you went through? And
So above Tobacco Garden, I went through, one of the very large canisters,
Yep.
maybe 100 charge canisters. I went through one of those above. I went through one of those the whole rest of the trip. All I did was boil water at night, and that was it. And you just, again, jet boil is very efficient. MSR stoves are very efficient. I really think if you just leave your stove to boil water, that helps with weight and everything else. There were nights I ate cold because the weather beat me. I didn't want to cook in the tent. I wouldn't fire up a stove in the tent. So, but I really changed my food plan around after I hit Tobacco Garden, where I boiled water, and that's all I was using the fuel for. And the Mountain House enabled me to beat 3 storms. I was, fat, and my tummy was happy. I wasn't fat, but I had probably 500 calories for breakfast, maybe 100 calories for lunch, and then another 1,000 calories for supper. That was my routine. I probably should have pushed it a little bit more.
yeah.
Hey, can I switch gears from food and ask a quick question? Because I'm going to have to get off here in a minute.
Go for it, Andy.
So in Dave Miller's book, he was talking about if you're wishing to camp on the north shore of Fort Peck, that you need to ask permission, since that's the reservation or whatever there. Is that still a deal?
That's actually below the dam. So after the reservoir and after the dam, from there to Culbertson is Sioux Indian Reservation.
Okay.
And you're supposed to have permission from the tribal council there, which I think is based out of Wolf Point. I always tell people to camp on River Right or the south side, which is non-Indian land, native land, just to play it safe. There has been people that have had issues on the north side, and other people have had great experiences on the north side, but
Okay, I was referring to the reservoir itself.
yeah.
No, I can't
Because-
everyone anywhere. I don't think that's tribal
Because
ground.
that
Yeah.
is Fort Peck Reservoir. There's an area there that he said you had to, to avoid, but I was planning if weather and winds allowed, I was gonna stick to the left
Yeah,
shore.
I've never heard that. And in fact, everybody goes on the north shore. Otherwise, you got like a 20-mile open crossing at the end.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm pretty
Okay.
sure it's all state or whatever.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I'm with you, Norm. I don't, below Fort Peck down to the Wolf Point areas where Dave Miller's book and everyone had told me, be very stealthy,
Right.
be very hidden. And
Yeah.
then once you get down towards Sac, then you're in good shape.
Right. And plus I don't like, and I appreciate all your waypoints and I've noted all of them, but I kind of go like Norm, I don't like being around people, quite frankly. So, I mean, I like people, but when I'm paddling, I just kind of like to do my own thing. But real quick, one more question. To take these hikes up to the hole in the wall and like some of these things, are we cool and just like my regular river shoes, that I'm gonna get wet? Like, do you have to?
yeah, most of them we take people some of them you might want a sturdier shoe, like a Merrill hiking shoe for like
Okay.
the hole. But I've
Right.
had people, I personally have gone up there in my Merrill sandals or a Tevas
Okay,
sandals.
so there's not a problem with with rattlesnakes and that kind of stuff?
No, I mean, that would, yeah, you could definitely see them, but I don't think it would matter if a snake
Okay.
bit your shoe or a sandal, you're still gonna get bit, but yeah, you're all right on the
Because
stability.
I tell you, this is my thing this time because I went too quickly on the Mississippi. I
Do
just
not rush it.
dominated that river and I am going to go half as fast and take in twice as much on this trip. So
Yeah.
that
Stop
is,
and see
and that is
everybody.
going to be really difficult for me because I am, I know I'm going to allow it to, there's no schedule, but I've got concert tickets in September in Nashville that I really, and I figure if I don't make it, I've already talked to Tina and Tina is going to take my boat, Tina Brooks, who's around Waverly area.
Mhm.
He'll just hold on to my boat. I'm gonna rent a car and I'm gonna drive down there and go to the concert and come back.
Who is it worth leaving the Missouri to go see? Who?
I can't tell you that yet. Wait till I get up there.
Uh,
I'll keep you guessing, but thank you very much. I'll see you next Wednesday. It was great seeing everybody. Looking
Cool.
forward.
We'll see you then. Thanks.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Another question,
Who el-
anyone?
Yeah, who else has questions? If we can help.
I was working on putting my potatoes in the oven when you were talking about your tent. What kind of a tent did you use?
I got lucky. I have an REI tent. It was the 2-man half dome. I think the one thing, again, during the rendezvous, when we had the storm go through, most of the tents that broke were older tents they had used. When they tell you, and Norm's got this in his webpage, that when you get done with this trip, your tent's trash. That tent I'll never use again. I mean, 4 straight months, I think 120 out of 124 days I was in the tent. You wear a tent out. I like aluminum poles. Again, look at it. You need to be able to take 45 to 50 mile an hour winds, especially in the Dakotas. Some of the paddlers have seen tornadoes, but again, just some big wind events. The edge of a storm front comes through, turns into a rain and thunderstorm. But my tent got flattened 3 times and it came out of it just fine all 3 times, just a little more beat up than the last. I also had a sleeping pad. So if water ever did get in, I'm on my pad. It never did. My tent stayed dry. But just look at the specifications. Maybe the other thing would be, I wouldn't get a tent that you just fit in and nothing else fits in. It's your house. And so I could put my clothes, and I had a little bit of room to put other stuff in there without having to leave it outside under the rain fly. And that was a huge advantage several times with weather.
Yeah.
I would
had a-
agree with that. In addition, let's see, we lost a couple of tents during that time. Tents were flattened a number of times, and make sure you got a pole repair kit as well. We were able to salvage one set of poles. So it was just a 3-season tent, but agreed it ideally should be new because it will be tested and it will be flattened a couple of times. I know several storms I would hold my back up against the tent to keep it from becoming flat, but we got hailed on and it bruised my back up pretty good. If it went on another 2 minutes, I couldn't take it. Another option is to use a paddle to hold up the tent if you're in the middle of it, and that can take some of the stress off the poles if that's happening. Also, duct tape's a good thing to have. You don't have a tent repair kit. So,
And one other thing, which was, I had it along for different reasons, KT tape, the tape you use to do muscle groups. And so you've seen it on the volleyballers. KT tape is very, very sticky and very stretchy. In terms of fixing poles, it's the best thing on the planet because duct tape is kind of rigid, but KT tape is just as sticky, wraps very tight. And so I had a roll of KT tape, which I used to repair my tent when I ripped a stake cord just by hitting with my leg. I fixed it. That was on week 2. It lasted the rest of the trip. So a roll of KT tape has multiple uses.
another caution on the camping would be to, one of the 5 W's of setting up camp is widow makers. Those cottonwoods get pretty damn old and you'll see quite a few blown over. So I had 2 guys in my group. One was sure to stay away from cottonwoods at all costs, and the other one headed right for them. So I'm not sure what the best idea there is, but you will see some high winds. And my preference was to make sure I check the trees before I set up, because I've seen those cottonwoods bending over halfway. Even on Canyon Ferry Lake, I got a picture of some full-grown cottonwoods almost bent halfway over. So beware of those as well.
Yeah, great advice. I had that one down day in Woodhawk. We had 50. It was a gale force day, and yeah, there was one tree went down. Luckily, we'd all identified it before we set up camp, but or at least the rest of the group had. I didn't pay attention the day I came in. I was too tired, but yeah, really good advice.
Now to comment on the wind, like I said, if you got a tent and you have the little loops on the flies and wherever, get cordage for that and get good stakes for everything. There are times when you have like 14 or 16 tie downs, stakes down. I encountered like 3 tornadoes in 2004 of mine, and one destroyed my whole tent, and others passed close by. I didn't know. I'd even sleep with my life jacket on in case I got blown into the lake in the middle of the night, so I would be floating when they found me. But another thing is tie your boat up, man. Your boat can blow away easy, and tie the.
I pulled mine up far enough, but you're right, Norm. If you get enough of a wind, and the waves come up too high.
Yeah, tie the boat up at all costs.
Yeah, we got pretty good at keeping an eye on the weather, and when it looked like we were going to be overtaken, we would proactively pull over and set up camp just to let it pass. So you want to keep your camping gear easily grabbed, tie up your canoe and run up on shore and set your tent up quickly. They can come on you quick. There were times we tried to outrun the storm. It was going to catch us. So we'd pull over and set up camp, 2 hours later, let the thing's blown over and you tear down and get back on the river. So you want to have some efficiency in setting up your camp.
And I assumed I could get weather off my cell phone, and when I'm so glad my GPS had weather, because I relied on it for more weather than I did the cell phone. I didn't have coverage, and so that cell phone gave me wind direction every 3 hours. Plus, I couldn't get radar, but I could get what the weather was going to do that day. Temperatures, you could tell. I'm used to reading weather and when the fronts are going to come through. You've got to have a good weather source. You really, the early part of the trip, I relied on a lot of fishermen who were out there in their boats with, $1 million, $200,000 fishing boat has great radar. And I'd say, hey, can you tell me what the weather's looking like tonight and then tomorrow? And they were wonderful. They'd help you out in any way they could. So again, a water resource to worry about the weather.
Did
I
you
was just going to ask that, what would be a good weather source? I know a lot of the Mississippi paddlers they use the marine radios to get through the locks and dams and stuff. And I think those have a river or a weather channel or something on them. Would it be worth picking up a marine radio and taking with us on this?
I think the one thing to balance a marine radio is battery. Marine radio is going to use battery. So if you're going to turn it on in the morning, look at stuff and then turn it off, I think a marine radio would be a great addition. I was happy because my GPS, I turned it off at night, but it ran all the rest of the time. I needed charged once every 2 weeks. It just didn't. And I was sending up data. I was taking a data point every 2 minutes and sending it up every 10. And even at that rate, I needed to charge it once every 2 weeks. It had a weather function and it was a really good weather function. So explore what your GPS has, marine radio. Again, the fishing community is wonderful to ask those people as you go through. But as the one gentleman said, you got to be ready. You saw storms come in. I made that mistake once of I should have stayed put and let that storm blow through. And I got on the river and luckily everything turned out okay. But that was just dumb.
That's actually an item I am going to upgrade. The GPSs I have been using are all battery, the old E-Trex models. And I, like you said, I don't want to pack, 10 pounds of batteries for these things. And
everything
I'm looking
I
at some
had
of the
was-
Garmin's that are solar powered now and all.
Yeah, everything I had was USB chargeable. I had 3 battery packs. And if I needed to, I could have used a solar panel. But literally once a week, I was near someplace I could plug in, charge up, and 3 battery packs would run me 2 weeks. Because I didn't get on and use Facebook at night. I was using for my weather and I was using it to make sure that my lights were charged and my GPS was charged. I had a little plasma torch that was charge it. I just made everything was USB chargeable and it saved huge on weight. Some people do very good with the solar panels too.
Yeah, I like that idea of 3 bricks. I had 2 and our trip was a little bit different, but I primarily relied on solar. And I was running empty quite a bit, but I like that idea of 3 bricks when you can charge up, you hit those, and that's a skill, trying to find some place to plug in as well sometimes. But then I would try to keep my solar running, charging those bricks at all times as well. But I like that idea, 3 bricks,
and
relying on municipal power, and then solar as backup.
Did that solar channel work, the charger work out pretty well for you? I've got 2 bricks and I was looking at solar panels, but now after tonight, I'm thinking maybe forget the solar and pick up a 3rd brick.
My panel is 14 watts and I think I should have been higher. Then again, I tended to favor, I stayed at several South Dakota and North Dakota campgrounds. They had power, I could charge up. On the Mississippi, even when it got thin down there, and you'll see next week, I'll talk about that. There are still places to charge. And I learned quickly, I carried too much water weight, and weight impacts a lot of stuff. So, and Norm just gave us, we might lose everything in 3 minutes. But again, next week, Norm and I've got a little smaller PowerPoint. We can go into more questions on the trip too. But
we can just keep it going here. I'm not sure. Zoom's scheduled till 7:15 Central. I don't know if they just quit. I'll just keep it going. If we get an extra 5 minutes, we'll just
See if we do.
We got another question or 2. Let's do it.
Yeah, power bricks are great.
Yeah, maybe I'll pick up a 3rd power brick and not worry about the solar at that point if 3 work for you.
Yep.
So I have a question about chain of rocks. I'm just going to go to the arch, but I assume from everything I've read, the best thing to do is to portage and not do the diversion canal.
Yeah, so you'll see it next week. So you have a choice. You can do 7 miles of absolute no barges and go by chain of rocks, or you can do the diversion channel and take 4 hours to go. Yeah, you're part of traffic. The only downside to the chain of rocks is that portage, and you portage river left, is not the greatest portage. And when I say that is I didn't want to empty everything out. I emptied the whole kayak, got it up on the parking lot, reloaded everything, and then I was fine. So it's just not a really nice trail portage, but you can't go through chain of rocks. I won't, as a whitewater paddler, I won't run chain of rocks. I've seen it. Now that I've seen it, and you'll see it next week, rebar, rocks, it'll damage a boat. And then Mosenthine Island is just downstream. Most beautiful chunk of ground to camp on the planet.
Yeah, I live in St. Louis. I get up to the chain pretty often. And at certain water levels, you know, if it's high, if you're coming down and you got high water, you can get through it. Now, personally, I haven't ever done it.
I ran it in 2000.
I know a lot of people that have.
Yeah, I ran it in 2019. That was a flood year, though. Everything was extremely blown out, and we were advised that we could run it, and had some help from Big Muddy Mike. He joined us there, and he met us just downstream of it. But yeah, high water, you can make it, but it's still kind of scary.
But Dave was saying that diversion channel, that is like getting into soup. I mean, you've got
and traffic, tons of tow traffic.
Yeah, and there's barges up and down it. You really don't want to go in and paddle down that diversion channel.
And I've had whitewater buddies run the chain, and they know where to run it. But yeah, I think it's no worse than the portages you did upstream, and it's pretty simple. And there's beautiful camping below, and there's no boats, so the river is you're going to see enough traffic. That 7 miles is kind of special because you just hit the confluence. And now you get to see this pristine, there's still no tows around you. And it's quite the experience.
Culture shock.
So Dave, real quickly, did you camped on Mosenthine? Did you camp on the south side and watch the arch? You get a look at the arch overnight and all?
You'll see it next week.
Okay.
Got some really good pictures.
Very good. I will say this, Dave, I was like 50 yards away from you at St. Charles as you pulled away.
I didn't know that.
You were talking to Denise Damon, one of my co-paddlers, and I seen you down there, and I knew I was trying to find you that day. I think we put in at Paddle Stop that day, and I was like 50 yards out coming down. I seen you pulling away. I was like, oh no, I think that's that Dave I wanted to talk to.
I'm sorry. I wish we could have hooked up.
You were talking to Denise about a place to camp, apparently.
Yeah. Well, and the other trick is, I'll talk more about it next week. It is very hard to hook up and paddle with people in the river. A lot of people wanted to paddle with me, but because that schedule is completely fluid, I got lucky. I had 3 different times. A couple of my buddies in South Dakota group paddled with me up in Oahe. And that was the first time I paddled with anybody in over a month. And my boat wasn't happy. My boat didn't want to paddle with anybody. You talk to your boat a lot. But yeah, it's really special when you get to paddle with somebody. In fact, I believe it's a rule. If you see a fellow paddler on the river and you don't go over and say hi, you jinxed your trip for life. So everybody I saw paddling, and I didn't see very many, but I always made a point to go over and say hi and ask how their trip was going. And again, other people to meet. It's just amazing river people.
Awesome. So we end there.
Norm,
Yeah, go ahead.
leaving on May 17th, will I need to be worried about having some heavy clothing for the weather?
I would. We definitely get snow.
Oh, Norm, you're being nice. Hell yes, you better.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
the
I would
third,
take some cold weather gear for a couple weeks.
Yeah, the third mistake I made was I only brought 1 pair of pants, and that was neoprene paddling pants, which I assumed would take care of me in the day if I got wet or it was cold. It did, but they were wet most of the time, so I didn't wear them in my tent. At Gates of the Mountains, so if you start in June, the typical temperatures won't go below 50. I got down to 40 in Gates of the Mountains. I had everything on I was wearing and in the bottom of my sleeping bag. Again, I did what Norm did. I had paddling clothes, go to town clothes. Just didn't want having 2 cold weather clothes and warm weather clothes was going to take up too much room. So be really picky on what clothes you take if they could do dual use.
Yeah.
I would agree. If you start before June 1st, you'll need some cold weather gear. Yeah, we got snowed on at Canyon Ferry, I believe.
Ooh. Cold.
Yeah, Canyon Ferry is rough.
I'm glad I'm not I'm never going back that lake again, ever. I hate that lake. Tried to kill me.
And yeah, we against Norm's advice, we took the Lake
side.
Right. I don't know what is that?
Lake right.
Yeah, I'll go Lake Left this next time. It put us on the beach for about a week. We just kept getting slammed against the beach. We had planned on camping on that side and had some visitation on river right. But yeah, that wind coming across there is horrible. So Lake Left at Canyon Ferry.
And I sent Norm all my camping sites and stuff. He's got the data sheet. Again, a lot of it's just going to say sandbar, and those will probably be gone depending what kind of water levels. But the permanent ones are there, and so you could look at those and see how they align with the type of journey you're thinking about. Again, I hate camping. I wanted pit toilets, picnic table. Not that I didn't enjoy the sandbars, but I also enjoyed having a little bit of civilization around me. And you know, it turned out to be the perfect mix. Some days I was living high off the hog, and some days I was just out there. There was one point in Montana, I didn't see anybody for 3 days. I didn't see a building. I didn't see anybody. And amazing stretch of wilderness. Just you're gonna love. The upper is so pretty, so gorgeous.
Yeah, it's sort of like when it comes to food even, I think Tom Elpel's trip that I participated on was a little bit unique, and we probably set the slow record for us. You know, we didn't even get to St. Louis until November, and you had made it all the way down to the Gulf. So I think your food factors into your speed of descent. In our case, we were seeking attractions in history. So we were stopping all the time, and that primarily put us in more campground situations rather than sandbars. So depending on, you know, if you're on a slow roll, your food intake can be different, but you could probably go the entire distance and never stay in a campground if you so choose.
Yep.
So your food can go either way. And in our case, we didn't do a lot of dried foods. We just relied on grocery stores and things like that. But some of those locations, you're talking extreme distances.
Yep.
So, you know, worst case scenario, you got to walk, you know, several miles to get food, and then you got to carry that food back. So there can be substantial hiking in there. I guess in hindsight, you know, we went super slow. I'd like to go a little faster next time. So I think your food's a balance of that. Definitely be independent, and certainly resupply at a regular store is going to be hit or miss depending on the type of trip that you're doing. In our case, it was extremely slow, and we were attraction oriented, which was more city oriented. So we had more access to food by where we chose to stop. So if I were doing a fast descent, I'd probably do more dehydrated type things where I could, you know, just sandbar camp the entire way down. So it sort of depends on the nature of the trip that you're doing.
And I would be careful on where you know, campgrounds and where you leave your boat. You know, I only had one issue. I was at West Whitlock in South Dakota, and I left my boat down at the beach because the campground was up above, and I had some teenagers mess with the boat. I know once you get down to the Mississippi, we've had a lot of the through paddlers have had issues leaving their boat. So if you're by yourself, you don't have a partner to watch the boat while you go into town. So at campgrounds, I would be, if you're going to hide a boat, make sure you hide a boat. But for me, I didn't have to hide a boat because I was always staying next to it. Again, I had a month's worth of food, and between tobacco gardens, that's the next thing we'll talk next week. When you get down to Iowa at Wilson Island, if I can get over there, I've got to drive. But if people use Wilson Island, I will be a River Angel and resupply. It's the only place in Iowa you can stop, but it's reasonable in terms of getting off, having a campground, and doing resupply. So this year, if people do that, I'm going to offer to try to help out if I can get over there. But even there would be River Angels people in the area. The Maybes down there, Omaha, There's a lot of river angels. Norm has a great list of just the most awesome people you can ever see.
Yeah, fantastic people. If you get into trouble, there'll be somebody there to help. And yeah, unbelievable people, wonderful people experience.
Cool. Well, let's end it.
Cool. So
Okay.
next week, gang, we're going to finish the rest of the trip, and people who have questions will ask questions. You're going to get to see my big friend who's 17 feet long next weekend, and we'll talk about him, but lots of fun. So
Thanks.
hopefully everyone has fun with it, but this is fun for me because I got to team up with Norm, and we get to do some cool stuff.
Dave, thanks for doing this, and thanks all of you who took the 2 hours to do this. I recorded it and I'll have it on YouTube here maybe in a week. So it's not lost. You'll be able to see it again and pass it on. So cool.
See everybody
Thanks,
next
man.
week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right,
Yeah, see y'all
thanks,
next
Norm.
week. Thanks. Thanks,
Come
Norm.
on.
Thanks,
Been
Dave.
fun to hear.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody. Thanks, Dave.